Hi, I'm Brian Dilg, and I'm here to talk to you about something called the components of exposure. Now, this term just means the settings on any camera that determine how bright your picture is going to be, and there are three of them: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Now, if you're not already familiar with these, I suggest you take a look at our other videos before you go any further. Here, we're just going to do a quick recap about how they work. Aperture means the size of the opening in the lens that controls how much light is going to get into the camera. Your aperture will also determine depth of field, which means what range of foreground to background is going to be in focus. Shutter speed determines the length of time that the camera shutter is open and allowing light to flow onto the imaging sensor. Your shutter speed will also determine whether you see any motion blur or how much you can freeze fast-moving subjects. Last but not least, ISO determines how responsive the camera sensor is to light. The trade-off here is that high sensitivity can introduce some noise into your image. So let's see these in action. When you press the shutter release button all the way down, the shutter curtain blades that normally keep your sensor covered slide open very quickly. Light enters the lens, passing through the aperture at whatever size has been selected. Light strikes the imaging sensor for a very precise length of time, determined by your shutter speed, usually just a fraction of a second. And the sensor responds with a sensitivity dictated by your ISO setting. Then the shutter closes and it's all over. So the key thing to understand is that these three components of exposure work together to determine whether the picture you see is too bright, too dark, or just right. Because any of these three factors affect how bright your exposure is going to be, changing any one of them means you have to compensate with one or both of the other two if you want to maintain the same exposure. And remember, we use the word stops to describe how much the exposure changes. So specifically, a full stop change means that we've doubled the light or we've cut it in half. So let's walk through the thinking process in a typical situation. Let's say you're outside and you want to shoot a beautiful landscape, and you want all of that great detail sharply focused. That means you'll have to use a small aperture to maximize your depth of field. Well, a small aperture means less light gets through the lens. So to maintain the correct exposure, you could leave the shutter open longer to give the sensor more time to gather enough light. Well, if nothing is moving and you have a tripod so the camera doesn't shake in your hands, it's not a problem. But what if you don't have a tripod, or you need to freeze moving objects? In that case, you'll have to use a quick shutter speed, and now you're back to the same problem: not enough light. In that case, your answer is to use a higher ISO to make the sensor more sensitive to light. That lets you use your small aperture and a quick hand-holdable shutter speed, but the only trade-off is that at some point your ISO may get so high that you start to get a little more noise than you want, less accurate colors, and possibly detail that's not quite as nice. So this is the thought process you go through every time you shoot. How much depth of field do I want? Does my shutter speed let me handhold the camera, freeze the action, or give me the motion blur I want? Am I going to be happy with the look of the ISO I've chosen? All three are interconnected, and they each affect the look of your image in different ways. In the beginning, it's challenging to juggle all three when you're just trying to capture the moment. So what I recommend is concentrate on the setting that's most important to the look you're going for, and let the camera set the other two automatically. Take a look at our video on shooting modes for detailed instructions on how to do exactly that. Well, thanks for watching, and be sure to take a look at our other videos for more great information.